as the leader in the room, don't be the first to talk, because you will influence in those moments. And so you may be cutting off the opportunity for conflict or for something that needs to be resolved, because as leaders, sometimes I'm pretty impatient.
No one's ever called me impatient, Mark. I mean, clearly that is not true, because sometimes I just keep digging into you're in the middle saying something brilliant. I'm like, I can't wait. I have to say something. Totally. Yeah, impatient here. I'm Angela and I'm impatient. Welcome back. On today's episode, we are speaking with Marc Reinfenrath, the CEO of Spinutech, a company he founded 25 years ago when he was a junior in college. Under his leadership, this web design company continues to thrive today. It focuses on high-end web development, emphasizing content management, custom software, web programming, and a full range of e-commerce, web hosting, and design services. That is a lot. So basically, full range digital marketing. He is also the host of the Growth Fire podcast, where he interviews business leaders from around the country and also various industries. Now, listen in to learn about Marc and the lessons he's learned maneuvering the continually evolving world of digital marketing. He's also grown a strong brand with a world-class company culture. So join me, Angela Gill Nelms, on today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast, where I'm joined each week by industry experts for intimate and eye-opening discussions about the challenges and joys facing the leaders of today. Listen in and get ready to scale your company, grow your brand, and unlock your full badass potential. Okay, listeners, I am super excited to have Marc, and I practiced how to pronounce your last name. I literally did. You should I replayed your podcast, Marc, and I was like, okay, this is Reifenrath. I don't know. You're gonna say it. You're gonna say it first.
I always say Reifenrath. Just put the fun in the middle. Reifenrath.
Reifenrath. Okay, Reifenrath. I like that. Okay, so anyways, we have Marc Reinfenrath, the CEO of Spinutech, with us today. We are going to talk a lot about, this is the Badass Leaders Podcast, so we're going to talk about ways that he's a badass leader. And first off then, Marc, I want you to kick us off and introduce yourself.
Sure. Marc Reinfenrath, Spinutech. We're an all-digital agency that I started when I was in college. Tons of experience as a junior in college. We started as just web dev, building websites, and fast forward 25 years later, and we've made it 25 years, which is against a lot of odds. But I'm married, have 3 amazing children, 10, and then twins that are 7. I live in small town Iowa, which is kind of odd for a digital company, but we actually live out in the country on 6 acres. So I'm literally in small town Iowa. The closest town is like 1,800 people. I love what I do. I love leading people. I've kind of grown into that. I love my family, love my church, love to play golf and travel. So those are kind of the overview I would give you.
So one of the things that in our research of you, we of course found out that you started your company when you were a junior in college as a resume builder to help you stand out. So one thing I will gift to you today, Marc, is that you're on this podcast, which means you're officially a badass leader. So you can add that to your resume or to your LinkedIn. Be like, I'm a certified badass leader. So I'll gift that to you today. But what I want to dig into is, okay, what really got you and sparked your interest in the field of content marketing, web design, especially in 2000, right? I remember, I'm turning 50 this year. I remember the internet and digital things back in 2000 and what they are now. Completely different, right? So maybe tell us, how did you really get a passion, a spark back then? And then how are you keeping it today?
Yeah, so 2000, wildly different, obviously. I mean, digital marketing wasn't even really a term that we used. I think I actually was labeling myself an interactive marketer when I was trying to get jobs, so just be different. Interactive was a word that was used a lot more then, if you remember. And so we carved out this, we built our own content management system, and that was different. That was unique. Nobody had that. And so we believe we were the first ones in Iowa and maybe a little beyond to have done that. And we literally had to explain what that meant. And so the passion was about helping businesses solve a problem. And then we started to get into e-commerce, and we built a couple of relatively large brands, first e-commerce sites. In 2003, we built one for Hy-Vee, 400 plus food chain store, grocery store in the Midwest. And they're thinking they're going to do 30 orders a month, and then helping that grow into online grocery shopping, and then Whole Foods, and then working with Bridgestone Firestone. So the passion was about solving those problems. And as our field changed, as more and more things became digital, we recognized that the web game was great, but it was also kind of constantly hunting, killing, and eating what we killed. And how do we get a recurring model baked into that? And we kind of had that. We had some licensing and some maintenance and support stuff that we baked in. But then YouTube comes out and Facebook comes out, and if you go back to 2005, 2006, there was kind of this unique divide of digital or web agencies and traditional agencies. We did not want to be seen as a traditional agency, so we actually started a couple other businesses. We had a social media company that was separate of ours. It was run by us, but separate, and then a video to web company. So 2006, we started both of these. So YouTube is hardly off the ground. Like we did an online cooking show for Wells Blue Bunny ice cream. We did some.
Oh, wow.
We had some viral videos that we created for some different companies. So that was kind of the start of the evolution. And so I would just say that we've always done a good job of kind of finding the trends and when we needed to evolve as a company. When we started, I heard that a lot from other leaders of, oh, this company has really evolved and adapted to the market. And I didn't always understand what that meant. I thought that, honestly, what I thought it meant was they failed at one thing and just reinvented themselves as an entrepreneur and kept going under the same business name. That was what I interpreted it as.
Which is okay if people do that, but
Totally,
it's not
totally.
Like...
That's what I always thought it meant, was that was the only meaning of it. But there's actually a meaning of you do have to evolve to what your clients need and possibly alternative ways to grow. And so we tried a lot of things that failed too, but we slowly evolved into this full service digital agency, and kind of that's where we sit today. But that was not a overnight success. It was year by year evolving slowly and changing, and there was rapid growth at times in evolving some of that, and different hires that had big impact on that. But it's just keeping a good ear to the ground on what our industry is doing. What's kind of interesting is right now we're going through a much bigger shift than some of the ones we've seen in the past. So even when people are starting to get websites with AI, and I would say the talent challenges and global talent needs, and there's just a lot of different things that are coming into play. And we've had this, I'll call it, weird economy for the past couple of years that has challenged all of us. And we've had societal shifts during all of that started from the pandemic. And so there's been some really good and some really bad stuff that has come out of all that. And I think as leaders, we're all kind of trying to figure out the game that we're playing right now and how best to lead through that and do that from a human perspective as well as a business perspective. And those two things are kind of conflicting right now a little bit, I think, of what is the best way to do both of those and be successful in both categories.
Yeah, I think, I love the idea of embracing the pivot for organizations that I've been throughout my career, kind of the pivot girl. And I think one of the things I've heard you say is that you're a learning leader and a lifetime learner. That is one of our corporate goals at the AGN Group, is to be lifelong learners. But I think really maybe perhaps some of what you're saying is you actually at a very young age and early throughout your career learned how to have your ear to the ground, how to listen to your customers and listen to the industry, which is pretty advanced for someone starting so early in the company that you have now.
So I would credit that to survival. So,
love it.
I mean, there's probably it's not like that was an intentional thing or that I had a mentor that I learned. I would literally call that survival. So you're hungry, you're hardly making any money in the beginning. Everybody thinks it's always been, rainbows and sunshine, and it's not. There's a lot of near-death experiences with the business that I think most people don't talk about. And so it was coming from a place of, if we also do this, or if we adapt to this, it makes us stickier. It makes us able to more opportunities to not just bill more, but provide value and an extension of what we're already doing. And so it's really been a constant evolution of what do our clients need, what does our ICP need.
How would you define ICP? So how would you, for people not in the industry, how would you define that?
So ideal client profile. So just labeling who we think we are a really good fit for, and that's the way that we're going to talk and portray ourselves, mostly digital, but it's really trying to make sure that, we don't, not that we don't want to talk to everybody, but when we talk to the right people, they want to be like, whoa, they are perfect for us because they do X, Y, and Z, or they talk our language, we're talking at the same level. And so it's kind of like having a persona for your business of, we have the soccer mom, and she's our buyer because she has kids and she's on the go and she's 35 and whatever. You have all these things that meet that persona. It's kind of our business personas too, of who we're trying to target and we want to work with.
That I think by doing that, you're so smart because then you can scale with them and select the organizations that you're really confident you can help make a huge success. You can make a lot of organizations successful, but when your brand and their brand, your vision and your values align, the speed to that success and the fulfillment of that success and the stickiness of that success are huge.
Yes.
So I heard as well, in episode 2 of this podcast, we talked to Ann Chow, who's the former CEO of AT&T Business. We talked about her book, Lead Bigger. And part of that, she tells the story about firing a customer.
Ooh.
And I know you have experience in this because you have mentioned through some of the research that we did on you about really, sometimes every customer isn't the right customer and you need to transition. Can you tell us a story of a time and a reason that you had to transition a customer out of your company?
Yeah, so there was 2 pretty close together. This was probably 2018, 2019. We're growing, and they were both, on paper they were a fit. Like, they were everything we would want. They had the opportunities, and our team could really flex our muscles, and so they just they felt perfect. And then as you get in, there's these cultural misalignments, and some of this was probably learning for me too of thinking culture is just what we control within our 4 walls. But then there's when you have that way of thinking and you're working with a client and their culture isn't what they say it is, or it's just not kind, or there's misalignment. And that's going to create conflict. And here's a long-term lesson I've taken from that. And I'll pull this back to the firing of them too. But, don't let today's decisions become tomorrow's problems is one. And so sometimes when you constantly are saying, it's okay, they didn't mean it, and you make those excuses, that short-term decision really creates long-term problems because they're going to drive away your best talent. And so it's never been this focus on just the dollar. It's never been about making sure that we wanted to do good work, but we also wanted to feel good about it. And when you're mistreated or they don't appreciate you, or they I hate the word vendor because we're not a vendor, we're a partner.
Partner,
That's
yes,
offensive
love
to
it.
me. And so they've got just getting that alignment in place is really, really good. But also learning that those cultures have to align. And so here's a big lesson of all this is when we have a problem, you can solve that using your core values. So you ask yourself, gosh, there's a problem with this client. And then I would just say to the team, well, which of our core values are they misaligned with? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it all? And then you go, okay, so why? And then you start to attack the problem that way. And it's maybe not perfect every time, but it does give you a framework to start from of they're not a we over me culture. They're not a we own it culture. They're not a we get better every day culture. They're not a we do the right thing culture. Those are our core values. And so if you align those things and you go, ooh, they are definitely not do the right thing. Well, is that one that we just, that's kind of bad. We're not going to live with that. So that's going to lead us to probably need to break it off. The other thing I'll tell you is when you do this, one, you get a ton of street cred from the team. But you also can't miss the opportunity, and I've said this on other podcasts, of saying, okay, we did this. We just fired $30K a month in revenue.
Right.
That doesn't
Which seems scary. Like, even when I hear it, I think, $30K a month of MRR? Like, oh no. But
very scary. But there's opportunity cost of keeping and
exactly
of firing. And so, challenging the team. All right, guys, we got to go find this. What are we going to do? And what can we shake to try to find that revenue and replace it with better quality revenue too, so that we're all happy and not getting burned out or not carrying stress. And so, it's never easy. And I think we have gotten better over time at not letting some of those slip through on the front side. I don't know if I would say this is as true today, but we got in a pattern where I would say we were saying no more than we were saying yes for some of those reasons. The market isn't quite as frothy as it once was, so you have to be a little bit more, really make sure that you're saying no for the right reasons and misaligned. But we will tell a client, and sometimes it's not that it's a contentious thing. It's more, hey, Angela, we're just not the right fit for you, but I do want to make a couple introductions that I think might be a better fit for you. And, the pay it forward mentality, there's a simple goodness that comes from that. And you will remember that and may refer somebody to us because we did that and did the right thing. So.
Well, I'm not going to take this as you just fired me before I've even hired you for anything.
Just a hypothetical.
Love it. No, great example. One of the things that I've always been super passionate about in building teams and building cultures are that your values have to be lived. I actually hate companies that put their values on the wall. And for a lot of reasons. One, I remember I worked for a company once and our values were written on our employee badge. And it became this joke because, for example, one of the values was speak up. But everyone knew if you were the person who was speaking up, you were not going to get promoted. You were going to be held back. So when I started building companies, a couple of the things that we did is we would do once a year annual reviews of our values because your organization can change over time. Yeah. And we had everyone come in and talk about it and everyone say this is who we think we are, and then we could use them as we gave kudos. I know you use in Slack, as you mentioned, which I love the software Lattice, which I've used, and you can go and give praise. Yes, exactly. I wondered when I heard that. I was like, I wonder if they use Lattice. But the thing I love about it is that when you give praise to someone, you immediately tag it to your values, and it reminds everyone to use their values every day. That is so powerful.
And yes, so you said, I think something that's really, really important is the lived core values. So it's not aspirational. In the beginning, you might need to set some aspirational ones when you're starting out or building a team. But if there's any tenure on the team, it can't be aspirational. It's got to be lived. The other thing I tell people is it's got to, as a leader, you have to have a near perfect record with those core values too. Because the minute you do something that's misaligned with that, if you don't either correct or own the mistake, now you've given permission for others to not be fully aligned with that core value as well. And so it does have to be lived, absolutely.
And as you were talking about the customers who don't align with your core values, if you're saying, it's okay to work with these people that don't align with our core values, but it's not okay for us to do that inside of our company, the mixed messages you send to the teams. Yeah. Now, I heard you say that your company values used to have maybe 8 and now you're down to 4. Can you talk a little bit about how you culled it down to those and how you chose those as your focus?
Yeah. Well, we didn't even have identified core values until probably 2016 or 17, somewhere in there. And so that was a fun exercise and kind of felt new. But it's not that they weren't there. They just weren't identified necessarily. But we would have these unspoken, I would say, and it was a smaller team. The shortening or condensing of it was just to make it more concise. I mean, 8's a lot. That's hard for people to remember. 4 sometimes is hard to remember, but it's easier, and we kind of themed them a little bit more and made them easier to consume, and then also spent more time of the meaning behind each one and showing examples. And you're right, in Slack, it's everybody knows them for the most part, I would say, and everybody it's a easy framework, which is important. I think now as a leader, not having them is a big miss because it's baked into so much of what we do as leaders. As far as how you do your reviews, how we do our hiring, how you might fire somebody because you're going, this person's misaligned with these 3 values. That's 3 out of 4. That just doesn't work.
I mean, that's huge, right? Exactly.
Right? 1, it's like, can we fix? Two is getting to the point where probably not. And so it's also, again, though, a framework for leading of saying, hey, I feel like we've got a misalignment on this core value. And you talk through it and you get a perspective. And I like to say as a leader, when you have a feeling that somebody's over here versus where they need to be, saying, my perception is this. I would like for you to prove me wrong, because if it is that, then we have a bigger problem. But prove me wrong on that. Like, just help me understand it. And within 10 seconds, you're going to know if
exactly.
There's a misalignment there or not. But as opposed to attacking and saying, you're not aligned with this core value, it's my perception is you're not really living up to this. And my example would be with this client, you did X, or with this team member, you did X. And laying that out there, and you're putting the problem on the table, not attacking the person, and you've got this framework of those core values. And so, yeah, I think making them concise, though, very important. So it's easier to consume, and they're not just fluffy. There's a lot of intention. We got a great compliment. Actually, our first team member, you've maybe heard me say this before too, but still here, I actually had a great one-on-one with him this morning. He made a comment about our core values when we were talking about them in one of those kind of similar review thing where you're kind of doing an annual kickoff or review of them. And he said, the thing I love about our core values is that they've always been present. They maybe weren't identified early on, but they've always been present, and they've just gotten louder over time. And I thought that was a really good compliment of consistency, whether it was words written on paper or on the website or not, that he knew that it was the Spinutech way. It was consistent in how we approach decision making and whatnot.
Yeah, I love that. And I love, I had a similar example, much like you interview your team members after they've been there for 6 months. I want to hear about your onboarding process because I love it. When I was building Florence Healthcare with the rest of the executive team, I interviewed every single employee at their 90 days. And that was a stage where I felt like that time frame was where people can start to get a little too settled in and kind of set in their ways. So it was a fun, pivot, energizing moment for both of us. Okay.
Yeah.
And I also had team members who said, when I interviewed and you guys said these things, I thought, well, of course, it's like everyone says that to get the new hire. They don't really do that because I think in the industry, that's where the status that it's set, right? And they said, but you guys, you actually live it, which I think is powerful because I think it also makes it easier to make some of those really hard decisions.
Yeah.
Is to say, let's go back to your value system and see where they fall. So I want to hear about your methodology in your company. So you started you and a classmate back in 2000, and now you're at 170-ish employees. You've significantly grown. And over the time, you've really morphed into this amazing onboarding process. Tell us about it and your review that you do at 6 months.
Yeah, so I just wrote down, if you saw me writing, that you said team member. So I'm not sure, is that language you use or is that something you picked up? Okay.
No,
so I think that's actually a good call out. I'm going to call that out first. Team members come to be part of something bigger than themselves and do great work with others. Employees come to check boxes and check clocks. So that's my definition of those. So I as soon as you say that, because I will correct people in our organization if that's part of the onboarding. So here we say team member, not employee. You can call anybody else an employee, but they're here, they're a team member. It's a very, very distinguished thing. So yes, we have the onboarding. The first 100 days is a very outlined process, and that really almost starts before they start. But the first 100 days is the trigger. But getting them their swag, their equipment in this more remote environment. Then there's surveys, there's meetings with different people. I do a cultural onboarding, ideally day one. If it's important from you, it should come from you. That was something I believe I heard from, it was either Andy Stanley or Craig Rochelle at a conference. And that was like 2012. And it just really resonated with me. So if you want your culture, if you're the ultimate champion of that, it should come from you, and let them hear your passion and get on your soapbox and get fired up and have that one-on-one conversation. And I talk about a lot of examples of the rule of 5 whys, for example, curiosity.
Oh my gosh, I love the 5 whys. So listeners, if you haven't, there's a book also called The 5 Whys, and it's it's the art of, why don't you tell the listeners what it's the art of?
Here's the example that I think is really easy to use with this. It's a good, bad example, but the Space Shuttle Challenger, and it was on Netflix, a documentary about this as well, and it validated it. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been using this. This is great. It's actually, I know it's real. But NASA has used this rule forever in the 60s and beyond. When something went wrong, why did it go wrong? Well, there was an explosion because of a fuel leak. Why was there a fuel leak on the shuttle? Well, there was a faulty O-ring. Why was there a faulty O-ring? Well, there was manufacturing flaws, and it was too cold when we took off. Oh my goodness, 2 splits now. Not just too cold, not just faulty. It was both those. That's both problems.
Right.
Why did we still take off knowing this? Because NASA had a schedule of trying to do like a launch a month that year.
Yes.
Well, but why? Well, there was a bunch of weather delays, and so we were under pressure to get it launched, and so all these things compounded into loss of life and loss of vessels. So 2 catastrophic things all balled up into one. And so how do you then take that and go, how do we make sure this is never going to happen again? And that's an extreme example, but it illustrates you got to dig and dig and dig. And it's, the other thing I say is, don't be afraid to let the big emotion out. Sometimes we got to let the big emotion out. So have your moment, but then we move into solve. And going into those 5 whys. So curiosity, we talk a lot about that in onboarding, but rule of 5 whys, if you're not using it and you take one thing away from this, I think that's a great one to use for any time something goes wrong. If it's been like my world, there's been plenty that's gone wrong in the last year and a half or so. There's lots of business challenges. And just ask yourselves that. Ask if it's about you and your performance. The other thing I do in the onboarding I think is a good takeaway is I give permission for them to give me feedback. So, if we want to be vulnerable and have a coaching atmosphere where it's not just me as the head coach, but you have player coaches, you have assistant coaches, and so on, I need them to know they can give me feedback. Now, does it happen?
Which upward feedback is so hard to get people to do. I will tell you this, I love it too. And the little skill that I learned is I had team members, and I believe in radical candor. It's one of my favorite books. And so one of my team members, I was like, okay, I need you to give me feedback. And she's just like, I can't. And I said, okay, you've been telling me how grateful you are for my candid feedback to you and how you've grown. So you realize if you're not willing to do the same thing for me, you're literally holding me back in my career. And so I told her this on a Friday, and I said, your homework is I need you to think of at least one thing that I am not crushing, and you have to come back and tell me that. And she did. And then she realized, oh, wait, Angela is actually really good at taking feedback. She's not like a great, and so then it became this natural environment, and then word spread, and then more people were willing to give upward feedback. But I had to tell them, you're literally holding me back in my personal growth by not doing this for me.
Yeah. Love that. And I think a part of that permission is to try to set the tone. And it's, if they're willing to give me feedback, and I'd say give the team you're on, give all of them permission and ask for theirs. And when you do that, it does create an environment. And because when you're watching a basketball game, it's not like something goes wrong and they're like, right, I'm going to talk to them at the end of the season. No, the coaches yelling from the side, it's a little more extreme. They're yelling from the sideline. Assistant coaches are. The players on the court are going to give feedback. When that player comes to the bench, they're going to have a little convo about it, probably talk with an assistant about it. In the locker room, they're going to talk about it. What are they going to do the next day in practice? They're going to probably make sure they know the play or shoot more free throws. Whatever the thing that needs to be fixed is, they're going to work on it and address it. Why don't we do more of that in the workplace? If there's one little thing that I can get better at that helps my team win, and I would say in this environment right now, I've talked a lot with our leadership team about we just need the people on the team that are going to help us win. Who is going to walk into that meeting and make it a winning moment? We don't have like big events where it's a Super Bowl or anything, but every day, every meeting, every client interaction is an opportunity to win the moment. And so are you?
Oh, I love that phrase. Say that. Yeah. Say that again.
Win the moment. I think it's so important right now because, and I'll use one of these. Take care of the small things. The big things take care of themselves. that used to be very true. I would say the small things right now can turn into the big things really quick. And people are under so much pressure. We work with CMOs, VPs of marketing. The theme of do more with less people, do more with less dollars,
Money.
but
Right.
you got to get the same or better results. Well, that's a hard equation to work, and so the pressure they have, and so when we mess up and do a really relatively small thing wrong, it could balloon into a very big thing very quickly. And so winning the moment is, I call it like a chip exchange. So when we do something good, we get a chip, one. When we do something wrong, we might have to give 5 chips back. Do we have a big freaking pile of positive chips on our side of the table so that if we do mess up, because we're human, we're going to, do we survive? Or we've got a negative balance and it's like, this is it, you're done. Like, we can't do this in this environment. Like, I love you guys, but it's a no right now. And so we've got to make sure that we're winning every single moment. And it's just this, win the day. There's so many different sayings around this, but it is more important now than it is ever. And maybe this changes over time, but there's just a lot of pressure for the C-suite right now in this current environment. Hopefully that's going to change. I think we're all been waiting like, oh, we get past the election, we get past inauguration, and now people are still just kind of holding back and waiting. So hopefully it starts to loosen up a little bit here.
I love that. And one of the things I'm thinking about for the 5 whys, especially in a world where maybe people have less time, less money, less resources, a beauty of using the 5 whys is the amount of time and energy you can save by not fixing the thing that's not the root problem. I mean, you literally, if you just went and said it's just the O-ring or it's just, just the weather, right? It's just one of those 2 things. You stop too early and you don't get to the core of the problem just by asking honest questions. Then you spend time, energy, resources going in all these disparate ways, and you're not really having the impact that you can if you get down to the core, which takes discipline. How do you do that discipline in your organization?
So let me give you another rule of I'll call it the double 5 whys. Okay, because sometimes your team may not want to truly admit what went wrong, right? And so you need to be the filter on top of that to make sure that what you uncovered as the problems, to your point, is the real problem, and you're not solving a false canary. And you're really looking for maybe another layer deeper. Like, yes, that is a problem. We can fix that, no problem, easy. But here's the bigger issue that we've got to really dig into that's probably a little more painful to fix. And maybe elimination of a person or a team member. It may mean somebody's, like, there could be more complex solves, right? So sometimes, though, your team, because they're trying to protect themselves, may not be willing to. But are you creating the opportunity for that vulnerability to say, it's okay to fail fast, and let's fail up. Let's make sure that we're taking advantage of this for you as well. I will never be upset as long as I know we're trying our best. When we don't try our best and we lose or we create a problem, that's when I get upset. Right.
And when you think of the idea of fail fast, all failure can lead to growth if you identify it. So really, it's grow fast and grow by learning these lessons fast, because we don't learn from the things that went well the first time. We really don't learn the maximum amount of that. We learn when we go outside our comfort zone, and then we suddenly say, wow, that really sucked. And we do not want to do that again. So what are the things we're going to put into place so that we don't uncover that? Now, one of the things that I've noticed about you that I just love, Marc, you, like me, love to have certain phrases that you repeat over and over. So my story is, my daughter is 22 now. And so I think maybe when she's about 10, we were in the car listening to the Fish station, which is a Christian radio station in Atlanta. And it was Mother's Day. And people were calling in and they were being asked to say all the things that their mothers used to say. And a lot of people were calling in with the, don't go outside with wet hair, like some of these type of things, right? And I thought, I want to, from this day forward, I want to start saying repeated things to my daughter. So if I'm gone, she always says, anything worth doing is worth doing well, or it's supposed to be the hard is what makes it great. Some of these things to say repeatedly and kind of burn into our head, and that were positive things for life lessons. And then when I started in the corporate world, I as well thought I'm going to use the same strategy so that people know my brand, they know who I am, they know I'm always going to be consistent, and they know how to collaborate and work with me. Now I want to know, how did you build this idea of saying these really deep phrases repeatedly in moments?
So I'm a visionary. I've got 20 ideas a day or more, 19 of which are probably terrible. One is maybe okay. And so sometimes when I'm talking, you'll just say those things and I'll be like, wait a second, that kind of rhymed, or that had a nice rhythm to it. And it's easy for people to consume. And win the moment's one of those. I mean, I'm sure other people have said it, but it came out. Or attract, retain, and grow. That's been a theme we used one year, and it's kind of stuck. And attract the best talent, best clients, retain them, and grow them. Like, very, very simple. So we talk about attract, retain, and grow a lot. 3 wide, 3 deep. We have 3 relationships with 3 different people on 3 on our team, 3 on their team. So this 3 by 3. All day, every day decisions I talk about. So they kind of come out and it sticks, and then I just keep saying them and try to get the team to do it. And when the team says it back, I'm like, yeah, see, it's a good idea.
That's it.
I'm like, so it's sometimes more of a game. Now there's plenty that I have that they're like, nope, we're not going to let that one stick. I actually just did a post yesterday on LinkedIn about this, where I listed probably 5 of them and asked what some of the ones that other people use. Because I do think that is you have to say something at least 7 times for it to typically stick with the team. And so if you really want to lean into something, I like these little taglines. And I'm a big sports coach mentality leader. And so I love that teams have these. They develop one for the year, and it's their word or their phrase that they come into, and all for one, or all together, or whatever it might be. But I love those. And so trying to find them in your business and that applies to your work, that is easy for people to kind of repeat and maybe even recognize in the moment, and you'll see it come back. And sometimes when you hear it a couple layers removed, it's like, hey, it's sinking in. All right, that's fun and good.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah.
One of mine, I had this happen with me with my last company, and I love to scale companies. I love to scale teams. I'm like super obsessed with culture. And so I will say to them, okay, when we're building something, we need to make sure it's robust, scalable, and sustainable. So I'll say those 3 things. And so I had, in a team meeting, the head of product say, well, as AGN would say, this is how it's robust. And I was just like, yes, you guys all laugh at me because I say the same things, but see how it worked, which was why I also think it's really important for individuals, companies, and leaders to be very thoughtful about what you say. Yeah. Because the exact same thing can happen if the words coming out of your mouth are derogatory, don't align with your brand, don't align with who you are as your authentic self.
Yeah. I think, so words matter is something I say a lot. And I'm a big fan. We haven't done this as much recently, but I think there's times when it's more applicable. But what are the words you shouldn't be saying? I don't love can't, won't, don't. There's some words like that I think you should try to eradicate from your culture and your language that you use in the walls. And some of this comes up with what's the social contract you have with your leadership team or the team you're on, and all talking about it. It's a healthy exercise to go through of saying, I don't like it when, as a team, we say things like X, or how do you create the right framework for that feedback, healthy conflict, radical candor, whatever. But just building that social contract so that you all kind of understand, here's our rules of engagement so that we can be the most effective team. It's getting everybody that's on that row team if they're sitting at the boardroom table, kind of like a rowboat, so that everybody's row, as opposed to everybody going different and we're trying to solve, but it's not quite lining up, versus building these social contracts where we know how we solve problems. I'll give you an example of something we did a couple years ago. We had done a merger. We bring these 2 teams together, and there were certain problems that were just lingering, and we couldn't make decisions on them. And so I said, okay, let's come up with a framework for this. Let's identify it pretty quickly. If it's a quick problem, we're going to solve it in that meeting. If it's a more long-term problem, we're going to give it 2 weeks to develop a plan. And I don't remember the exact rules, but at 2 weeks, if we didn't have something done, we did something else. But it basically forced us to put problems into two different buckets of a short-term versus more long-term. But even long-term was within 2 weeks, we have to have a plan of how we're going to solve it and an estimated solve date. So we can't do this in this quarter. So we recognize we can't make this, payroll software change until X date or time frame. Okay, fine. But we're going to make the decision of what we're switching to in Q3 so that Q4 it can happen and we hit Q1 of the next year in it. And so again, just using a framework so that everybody's got the understanding so that we solve problems quicker and didn't let them just hang around.
Yeah, I love that. And so when I think of a social contract, it's your agreement on how you're going to interact and collaborate with each other as an organization, as a group, as a couple, a partner, anything like that is your social contract.
Yeah.
So talking about, I can get super excited to talk about conflict resolution because I love one of the things I love about conflict is that when you have teams that are willing to have healthy conflict, then that's where you can have so much growth. If everyone is sitting around shaking their head, yes, we all agree, then you really have a big problem with your culture from my perspective. And one of the ways I like to draw out that conflict is that when someone is willing to speak up and say, hey, I didn't love this or something, to say as a leader, thank you so much for bringing that. To acknowledge them in front of everyone and thank them for being willing to enter into this conflict resolution stage of whatever we're working on. So can you walk me through? I know in 25 years, I'm guessing perhaps there's been a little conflict in your organization. Can you walk us through what your methodology is?
Yeah, I'm not a huge. I'm uncomfortable in conflict, but I think a good leader has to become comfortable in uncomfortable situations, and so I've gotten better at that. I'm quick to either I've become more direct with it of just saying, one, accepting it and saying, I'm sorry that I made you feel that way, or I'm sorry that was the interpretation. That certainly wasn't my intent. But let's talk through how, and so there was an example. I wasn't responding to emails from a certain leader. They were just updates. They were just saying, hey, just wanted to keep you in the loop on that. I read it, I'm done. And she let me know that, well, can you just let me know that you've read it so that I know that, just even if it's just a reply saying, got it, thanks. And I was like, oh, I assumed you thought that I had read it by, no responses, whatever. And so just understand, okay, now we understand that that's what you need to feel heard in that moment. So I'd reply, and, the first couple like, hey, here's my email letting you know that I heard you or whatever, but simple things like that. The other one I'll say is after the merger, another one of the leaders that I work closely with still to this day, we needed to get rid of somebody and we disagreed. And we got through it, right? Super hard. And it came from her side. And so we pulled it all off and she was still kind of upset. And we had a little disagreement back and forth. And we got done and I was like, hey, this was awesome. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, I said, we needed to do this so that we can understand each other better. And I think this is good. I said, the words, forget about the temperature of it, but the words we were saying needed to be said. You needed to understand my perspective. I needed to understand yours. And what we actually talked about is exactly how we need to solve problems. So let's do more of that, lower the temperature, but more of that, and that's a good thing. And we both agreed. And so I think that was like a bonding moment. And I actually shared that with the leadership team. I was like, hey, so-and-so and I, we made a lot of progress today. And here's why, and kind of talk through that. And just to try to show that vulnerability too. The other thing I'm big on is, as the leader in the room, don't be the first to talk, because you will influence in those moments. And so you may be cutting off the opportunity for conflict or for something that needs to be resolved, because as leaders, sometimes I'm pretty impatient. And so I will want to jump ahead.
No one's ever called me impatient, Mark. I mean, clearly that is not true, because sometimes I just keep digging into you're in the middle saying something brilliant. I'm like, I can't wait. I have to say something. Totally. Yeah, impatient here. I'm
So
Angela
as
and
leaders,
I'm
like,
impatient.
we may see the resolution or know what we want to do before the team does or whatever. But is it better to just stop and cut off, or is it better to let it play out? And so you try to have this mentality of they may not make the same decision as me, but is it in the framework of acceptability? And so I'm very cautious of when I do and don't jump in, which is hard. I probably used to talk. The volume of words that came from me in a meeting has definitely gone way down, but I do think that there's better. The other thing that I think has become important, and this is probably something I should have recognized a long time ago, is giving the leadership team space without myself in the room.
Oh,
And
I love
letting them
this.
do something. And that happened organically, actually, just recently, where we were doing an on-site leadership quarterly annual planning thing. And they asked for some space, and so we gave it to them. And I asked our COO afterwards, how was that? And she was like, it was really good. Like, the energy was good. We saw, and I was like, okay. Just based on what she said, I go, I had a suspicion, but I'm like, we need to create space to let this happen more frequently. So let's put that as we're a traction EOS company. So let's put that as an issue to solve for and come up with a cadence and rhythm for that. And so, and I brought that up. I'm also on YPO. I brought that up in forum, and there was a couple other people who were like, we just started doing that too. And so I don't know if that's a thing that, I'm sure it's happened in the past, obviously, but I think it's, for whatever reason, it's very relevant right now for teams that they need that space to solve for outside of you, the leader, the owner being in the room.
No, I love that. And I find oftentimes the individuals who are shy, your big introverts in the room, they can really come out in that because you're taking away a layer of fear from them, right? And then you're opening up the space. One of the things that you said when you were talking about being the last to speak, Nelson, I think Simon Sinek talks on his podcast a lot about like Nelson Mandela, and that is one of the reasons he's universally known as a great leader. And when people talked to him about it, he said, I learned from my father that to be the last to speak. And also this idea of being very thoughtful about your body language and your facial expressions. People tell me I could never play poker because you know exactly what Angela is thinking. But as people go around the room, be very thoughtful about not nodding your head or shaking your head at certain things, because then other people are going to subconsciously lean in one way because they think that's what they need to do to get something out of you. So if you really want to get really the most out of your team, speak last and be very thoughtful about how you react to each thing going across.
Simple rule that kind of seems to be always true. The person who's typically saying the most words isn't the person that's right, or the most right.
Right.
Human nature is to fill the space with words when you're trying to justify something, and the person who typically says the least words is perceived as the smartest person. Oftentimes, I'm not saying that I am. I'm typically the dumbest guy in the room, but
which means you're in the right room because you hired amazing people on your team.
That's my goal in life. I always want to be the dumbest guy in the room.
Exactly. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yes. That's really good advice. And it's hard as leaders too. But I think it's done well for me. And I've tried to give that advice to other leaders in the rooms that they sit in with their teams as well, which is, none of this is, most leaders aren't, you get some of it born and they're natural leaders, but then there's the refining of those little things that make them into amazing leaders. And that's what you try to help foster.
Yeah, and then we try and get them to badass leaders because that's what we try and do. Okay, so one of the things that you said earlier, I'm not going to get the 3 words right, so you can correct me, but it was something like hire or start well, retain, and grow. Mm-hmm. And the word that I really want to focus on is retain, because turnover can kill a company. It's so expensive. It can have a huge impact on culture. Some turnover is great. When you get rid of that vinegar that spoils the milk, that is the kind of turnover and transition you want. Okay. Some turnover is necessary because of economic times. You may have to make adjustments, reductions in workforce. But really, I want to think about this idea of retaining the key people, because we are not in the day and age, like you've worked at your company for 25 years. You should get a gold watch when you retire. We are not in the day and age where anyone gets gold watches anymore. Many of the listeners are probably like, what is she even talking about?
Yeah.
What is a gold
No, I
watch,
don't.
right?
Yes.
Right? So people only stay for a certain period of time. So what do you use in your leadership style, your leadership team, to retain team members?
Yeah, so we say attract, retain, and grow. And the retention thing, it's not a one size fits all. And the other thing that I've had to come to grips with over time is people are built for different stages of your growth and your journey as a company.
Say it again. Like, that is so true.
So let's break it down a little bit. I used to be somewhat offended when somebody would leave because it felt like they were quitting on you. We made it 10 years with no turnover. We still have our first 3 team members.
Wow.
Crazy stuff. Like, that doesn't happen. But when you had some that happen, you have to, like, oh man, well, why? And you're like, so some of them sting more than others. But then I've come to this place of celebrating it. And so, depending on the relationship I have with the individual, some people I try to connect with and, that I've had a little closer relationship with and just say, like, I want you to reflect on the day that you started and who you were as a person. And now I want you to fast forward to now and think about, in comparison, how much you've grown as a professional, as a human. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to own any of it. I just hope we were a platform that unlocks some of that for you. And you need to own all of it. And the other thing is don't stop. Keep going, keep growing, keep challenging yourself, because it's easy to change into a different habit of not growing. And so I like to use the example of treading water. If you're treading water, the current's going to push you around. If you're swimming where you want to go, you will get there. Even if the current's against you, you will fight through it. And so control where that water flow is pushing you and you be in control of it. But celebrating it and not looking at somebody as leaving. And so there's so many people that have been alumni at Spinutech that are doing great things. And, they were perfect for this time they were with us and outgrew us or we outgrew them. And that's totally okay. I think society's view on this being a negative thing is unfortunate. And you're right. The economy the last few years, we've had to do cuts that we've never had to do before. Super painful, super emotional as a leader, challenged me unlike anything. A couple of the hardest days I've had have been around that. But it's also an opportunity to grow and reflect and look at, what did I do wrong? What did we do wrong? What do we need to do better? So asking yourself some of these whys and trying to make sure that we are leaning into the right people, because society and culture has changed the last few years. Not all team members are team members. They are more employees, unfortunately. And so making sure that we're modeling the right behaviors. And so a year ago, I was big on definitions again. And so we say rock star, we say top player, top talent. Everybody has a little different flavor. Well, what's that mean? So I put some definitions to it. And we've been slowly kind of working that into how we hire, how we do reviews. So it's not just our core values, but also, like, if you think you're a rock star, here's what our standards of what that looks like. And also, here's what it's not. Here's 8 things it is, and here's 8 things it's not. And so, yeah, over time, I'm forgetting your original question now, but it's evolved as a leader about turnover and retention. We've traditionally had sub 5% turnover, which is, for our industry, it's typically 20%. In the spike of the Great Resignation, we peaked at like 16 or 17%. So still below when our industry was at 35, 40%.
Right.
But I think at times we maybe over indexed on retention when we should have had a little more.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I heard you say is, my thought as a leader is that part of my job is to help everyone on my team grow to be their best self. So one of the ways I think about retaining is giving opportunities for growth, making sure someone isn't always in this role because they're amazing and you think you can never find somebody else to do that role. No, that team member needs to grow. So one of the things I would say as I was hiring team members, I would say, look, here's the deal. Success for me really looks like you're here at least 3 years. I really feel like we've grown. And then when you leave, every job you apply for, they want you because you're the top candidate.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is then they're growing, they're doing amazing things. They also are saying, people will look and say, wait, everyone who comes from Spinutech is amazing. They do these things really well, and it becomes a part of your brand as well. So it's really a win-win in that instance.
It's the coaching tree. You know, they talk about college football coaches or basketball coaches, and you know, I'm from Iowa. Hayden Fry has an amazing coaching tree that started in the 80s, and all the different coaches that came from his tenure is quite phenomenal. And so, are you doing that as an organization? Are you leading in a way? I like to talk about the wake of leadership you create. Is it a positive wake or a disruptive wake? So a boat going through the water creates a wake. Am I creating one that is providing momentum for those around me, or am I knocking their boats over or, you know, blowing docks up with it? I want to create a positive wake that is encouraging and giving energy to others to unlock their greatness. And that's something we talk about in the onboarding process. If you think you can jump this high, I'm going to really push you to jump this high. May seem completely unattainable right now, but if you don't have that mentality, you should not be here. We will not apologize for our expectations or our culture. And if you don't like that, then like leave now, because it's cheaper to leave now than it is not. You know, Zappos used to do we'll pay you to leave in the first 90 days.
Oh yeah, that's right. That. Yeah.
But I think there is, you know, good times and bad times, you know, don't let the decisions during good times be uncovered as bad decisions in the bad times. So that may mean when you're growing, don't just put a butt in the seat. Take the pain then and have your team work a little bit harder before you get that butt in the seat, but make sure it's the right one. And that's so hard in moments of growth, and you want to support the team as best you can, and there's pain in that. But you know, when you're an athlete and you have to work out and you're training, there's a lot of pain, you know?
Yeah.
And I heard a couple of sayings recently that I just love. You know, everybody wants the view, but nobody wants to do the climb to get the view. And so you've all got to be willing to take some of the pain to get to that view, to get to the other side of it. And that's hard as leaders. We're impatient. A lot of leaders are impatient by nature. But make sure that you're fostering others to be willing to do the same things that you do. Set the tone yourself. Be the example, and that will be, you know, to me, that's lead by example, and consistency is one of the best ways to lead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Marc, is there anything you really hoped we would cover today that we haven't covered yet?
Oh man, so I mean, I think you and I could talk for another 5 hours and keep going.
We
you know,
could.
I think leaders today, it's tough. Leadership has changed dramatically, and I have definitely been on this constant challenge to myself of, am I being the best version of Marc? Am I being the best leader that I can? I think talking like this is good. If I give leaders one little snippet, I think that's good, and I try to consume content for that one little thing and go, you know what? I don't care that I didn't think of it. I'm going to take that and apply it to my world. So, you know, challenge yourself, find other leaders, find a mentor group, or a YPO is great if you qualify, or EO, stuff like that. Get in those to find, you know, peers that you can relate with. It's lonely as a leader a lot of times. And so the other thing is we didn't talk about how I think as leaders we have to be vulnerable in this environment. So we used to just lead the work version of an individual. Today we're leading the whole person, personal and work, because that all is kind of melded together. I think as leaders we have to be more vulnerable as well, and not be afraid to hide that stuff. So if I had a really crappy morning, I had one, I think it was right before a podcast recording. Kids were running late to school. One of the dogs pooped on the carpet, or puked. Not much difference.
Or either, right?
Right, and I had to take the trash can out because we forgot. Like, it was just chaotic, and then you got to jump in a meeting and act like it's all good. It's okay to be like, I've had a really crappy morning, and just to kind of laugh about it, because in the office we used to do that, and in virtual we don't do that as much. And so just being vulnerable and real, I think you're going to get a lot more out of the team around you when they see you are real and authentic, that wasn't necessarily the case 5-6 years ago. And so that would be one thing I would challenge us all is be authentic, be vulnerable, and you're going to get a lot more out of your team around you.
Well, I love that story. I'll say one story really quick, and that is I had an instance at my last company where I was super stressed one day, in a bad mood. Who knows why? Who cares why? No one. And I was really frustrated with our head of sales because he called a meeting and here half the company is at the meeting and he's on now suddenly a customer call. And I'm just like, seriously, and I'm telling his assistant, we have to do better. But I'm saying these things out loud in front of all these people who are here for this meeting. Okay. And I'm in the C-suite and I'm now reflecting this. And then as I'm sitting there, he comes out and he joins. And I suddenly realized that was so unprofessional of me. And so I paused and I said, okay, to this, I called him by name. And I said, I have to apologize to you. And I did this in front of everyone. I said, because I was just trashing you right now because you weren't here. But the reality is, I know you're busy doing this. I know. And I was just frustrated and I handled it inappropriately. So I am so sorry. Now, the cool thing about that is I later got a Slack message from someone on the team who said, I will never forget that day because I want to be a leader like you who's willing to share who's willing to be humble enough to not be perfect and apologize and share and stand up for what they need to.
Great
Which
example.
was really cool. Really cool. Okay. Now it's a requirement of this podcast that everyone share their favorite motivational quote. I don't know how you could only possibly share one since you have so many great things you say.
You made me think of another saying that I have. So the saying that I'd written down one, but so I love this saying, why not us? Why not now? It's a really good thing to say to yourself when you're going into a big pitch, a big meeting, to just give yourself that confidence. Like they don't know. They know what you portray. And so having that confidence. The other one I wrote down right now when you were talking, and this is so true right now, I think this is good for kids. There's so much parenting stuff that applies to leadership, but will your future self care about this? So I ask my kids this, like when they're upset about something relatively stupid, in my opinion, I'll be like, are you going to care about this in a month? You're going to care about this next year. You're not even going to remember it in a month. You're not even going to remember it now. My daughter's always like, yes, I'm going to remember it. But,
trust me, you won't.
But as a team, I'll say this too, like, will your future self care? And sometimes we beat ourselves up over something we did or a decision or an indecision or whatever. And sometimes you got to just move on. And so, your future self care. And the other side of that is if your future self well care, put the extra time in it and do it right. And make sure that you're treating it like the future self will want it to be treated.
That is amazing. Well, thank you, Marc, for bringing the badass to this podcast. We are very grateful.
Well, thank you. It's been fun. And again, I think we could talk for hours. So really enjoyed it.
Love it. Love it. We totally could, for sure. Thank you. Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.